This is the IDP After Show.
Number 4 for me, I've gone with a guy you mentioned earlier on, so Ernest Jones. So we covered a lot of points on him earlier on. He's got a great opportunity, great efficiency last year, may drop off, but his snap share, his snap volume is going to be greater than it was last year. Health, assuming health. So yeah, there's a lot to like. But despite what seems like a wave or like a tsunami of optimism about his 2023 outlook, I was kind of surprised to see him only going as the LB20 in those IDP show best ball drafts I mentioned, 2 spots behind the likes of Patrick Queen. I don't know about you, Jayson, but I know which player I would rather have at that spot.
I will take Jones there as well, without question.
All day, every day. So yeah, I'm not getting as carried away with him as a player as some are, but again, like I just mentioned with Jordan Brooks, we don't need them to be stellar linebackers. We just need them to play a lot, and Jones is going to play a ton.
Yeah, I think the challenge for me with Jones has been, I like him quite a bit as you do, and I mentioned all the reasons earlier. When it comes to actually acquiring him in a league, if you're in a league with 11 other people, there's usually one person who's like nuts about him and will go a round or two higher than I'm willing to go. He very rarely falls to me because he does have that kind of cult following, and there's usually somebody that's very enthusiastic about him and will snatch him up. And I'm kind of willing to let them do that for where I would have to take him in order to secure him. But if I happen to be lucky enough to be the most enthusiastic about him amongst the other 11, I'm more than happy to lock him down and put him on my roster. It's just I don't see that happen very often because, as I said, the dynamic is such where somebody's always kind of likes him a little bit more than I do.
Yeah. I drafted Jones everywhere, and I sold him slightly too early, around about the same time as I sold Jamin Davis too early as well. Hey, we all make mistakes, right?
I hear you.
But I made so many in such a short period of time. Really frustrated with
that.
Right. I'm a big Jones fan this year, and like I mentioned a moment ago, I could have Jones, Warner, and Greenlaw really in any order as long as they're at 4, 5, and 6 for me. Happy with any of those guys, really.
Yeah.
Who have you at 3?
So at 3, we're starting to get pretty rich here. I have Aaron Donald from the Rams. Obviously, for DT required leagues, we talked about that earlier. He's a cornerstone type player in those formats. But even in generic DL, kind of designation leagues, I still love Aaron Donald. And yes, I know he's 32 years old and he had a down season last year, and I frankly don't care one bit. We're talking about a 3-time defensive player of the year. He has never in his career missed the Pro Bowl. I found that pretty interesting, including last season, where he was riddled by injury, he still made the Pro Bowl. He's averaged 11.4 sacks, 17.8 tackles for a loss, 26.3 quarterback hits a year over the span of his long career. He's the kind of player that every offensive coordinator that builds their protection plan around. When you're going up against the Rams, you want to make sure where Aaron Donald is and how do you prevent him from messing things up. And yet he still shreds double and even triple teams en route to the quarterback. He's probably not got long left in the league, at least as a top performer. But especially if you expect to contend in the immediate term or you're in a redraft mindset, you want Aaron Donald on your roster for sure.
Yeah, we're on the same page. I have Donald on my list. I don't have him at 3, and I'll talk about him in more detail in a moment. But yeah, I'm a big fan, and I am very forgiving about what we saw last year for reasons I'll get into. So yeah, I love you having him in your number 3 spot.
Okay.
My 3 is Bobby Wagner. Now, it's one of the hardest decisions I had to make was to rank him at the top of the linebackers that I talked about earlier in my 4, 5, and 6 spot. But the reason I've gone with Wagner over Jones, because I know exactly who Wagner is at this point, whereas I'm fairly certain who Jones is. I know he's going to play a lot. With Warner, great player, doesn't always put it together. With Greenlaw, really good player, starting to put it together. But yeah, Wagner, I know what he is. He's been doing it forever and a day. Age is not on his side, right? He's just turned 33. And his tackling efficiency dropped off with the Rams in 2022. But I think that was largely because, and this was a point that surprised me a little bit, actually, when I went back and looked at the numbers, he blitzed a lot more than I remember when I was watching games. Certainly more often than he did with the Seahawks, over 100 times last year. And we know that those guys that do blitz a lot from that off-ball position struggle to put up the same sort of tackling efficiency as those guys that don't blitz often from those positions. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see him back on the Seahawks. It kind of just feels like he's gone home, doesn't it? And it just feels like the best spot for him for fantasy purposes too. So yeah, playing under a new DC in Seattle, Clint Hurt, and just joined the team last year when Wagner had moved on. But he continued to use two linebackers at a higher rate than the league average again last year. So in any event, Wagner's going to be the top dog. Even after Brooks comes back. The only real worry with Wagner for me is when will age catch up to him, really. And I think he's probably got I think he's at least got one more year left in him at that top level. I wouldn't be surprised to see him go for more, maybe two.
So I'm trying not to sprain my neck nodding in agreement with you here, but I pretty much, I'm agreeing with everything you said. I'll just jump ahead because I have Wagner ranked as my number 2 guy. So that's where we're headed.
Nice.
I guess much like Aaron Donald, I could kind of care less about Bobby Wagner's age. I mean, I agree with everything you said, and it's a concern, something you have to be mindful of. It's kind of blasphemous to say something like that when you talk about Dynasty, especially. But the fact of the matter, he's just that good. I mean, he's an 8-time Pro Bowler. He goes back to Seattle, like you said, after his brief stint in Los Angeles. He's man in the middle for over a decade. I think he's got basically like a Hall of Fame caliber resume at this point. He's got over 1,500 combined tackles in his career. All that time logged at one of the most brutal positions, he still stayed remarkably healthy. He hasn't missed, entire seasons or even half seasons, a game here or there maybe. But when you look at his numbers, he's stayed in the lineup, which is, I mentioned earlier, availability and durability are things that don't get talked about nearly as often as they should in fantasy, but he's going to be there for you. If you use a high draft pick on him, you can count on him being in your lineup. And he's a tackle monster, and he's going back to a place where he's comfortable, and they've got a contending roster in Seattle. They were a playoff team last year. So, you take all those things and you got a guy that's potentially Canton bound one day. I mean, you don't have to overthink it. I think Bobby Wagner's pretty safe bet.
Yeah. Big fan.
This was the IDP After Show.